We'll be practicing English through the powerful true story of George W. Bush, the president who led America through one of the darkest days in history. Just give me your attention for a few minutes. This story is not just about politics. It's not just about power. It's about fear leadership and one man's quiet transformation when the whole world was on fire. Because before he became the president, George W. Bush was lost. He was called the failure of his family, the black sheep. He drank too much. He didn't care about the future. And most people thought he would never amount to anything. But on September 11, 2001, everything changed. And in that moment, the world didn't need a perfect man. It needed someone who could carry the weight of grief, fear, and war. Welcome, my amazing friends. This is Learn English with Stories 365, where we improve your English through real-life stories that move your heart. Together, we will grow your vocabulary, your listening skills, and most importantly, your courage to keep going. Because this story is not just about a president. It's about choices, about change, and about finding your voice when the world falls silent. So sit back, open your heart. Let's begin the story of the man who faced history's most terrifying day and didn't run away. His name was George W. Bush. Part 1, Childhood. George Walker Bush was born on July 6, 1946, in New Haven, Connecticut. But even before he could walk, the world had expectations for him. He was the son of George H.W. Bush, a decorated World War II hero, and future President of the United States. His family was powerful. His name was respected. But little George didn't feel powerful at all. As a boy, he grew up in a house filled with pressure. His father was serious, successful, and always working. His mother, Barbara Bush, was loving but strict. George had brothers and sisters, but he always felt like the one who had to prove something. He spent much of his childhood in Midland, Texas. There were dusty roads, oil rigs, and wide-open skies. Life was simple there, and George loved the outdoors. He played baseball, rode bikes, and got into trouble like many boys do. But deep inside, he often felt like he wasn't good enough. His father was tall, quiet, and graceful. George was shorter, louder, and full of energy. He's the fun one, people said. But not the serious one. That hurt. Because George wanted to be more than fun. He wanted to be seen. In school, he wasn't a top student. His grades were average. He liked joking around more than studying. When he went to Phillips Academy, a very elite school in Massachusetts, he felt out of place. Most students were serious and polished. George was a loud Texan with a wild laugh. He didn't fit the mold, and he knew it. He had everything wealth, education, connections. But even with all that, he didn't know who he really was. Everyone expected him to follow in his father's footsteps. But what if he couldn't? What if he didn't want to? He was the son of a rising political star. But he wasn't rising, he was drifting, and the world had no idea what kind of man he would become. Part 2, Struggles and Rock Bottom. In college, George W. Bush didn't try to be the best. He tried to be the loudest. He went to Yale University just like his father, but he didn't follow his father's path. While other students studied, George partied. He joined a secret club called Skull and Bones. He drank too much. He joked too much. He coasted through classes doing just enough to pass. "I was young and irresponsible," he later said. "And I stayed that way for too long." After college, George went to Harvard Business School. But even then, he didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. He started a small oil business called Arbusto Energy. It failed. He tried another company. It failed too. He kept going, but he wasn't really leading. He was trying to catch up, always behind his father's shadow. In 1977, he married a quiet, smart librarian named Laura Welch. She believed in him. She gave him stability. They had twin daughters, Jenna and Barbara. But even with love in his home, George still struggled. The biggest fight was not in business. It was inside him. He was drinking too much. Late nights, hangovers, missed moments. One night in 1976, he was arrested for drunk driving. That moment shook him, but he didn't change right away. He was in his 30s with no clear purpose. His younger brother, Jeb, was already being called the smart one. George felt like a joke in his own family, a man with a famous name, but no direction, no impact. He smiled for cameras, but inside he was ashamed. Then came his 40th birthday. The night before, he drank too much again. The next morning, during his daughter's party, he felt sick, tired, and embarrassed. He looked at his wife. He looked at his daughters, and he felt something shift. He had reached the bottom. No one told him what to do. There was no big speech, just a quiet decision inside his heart. He poured out the bottle. He said, "That's it." And from that day forward, George W. Bush never touched alcohol again. He had been lost, but maybe he was ready to change. Because sometimes the lowest point is the beginning of the climb. Part 3, Turning Point. When George W. Bush stopped drinking, something inside him began to grow clarity. For the first time, he could see his life without the fog. It wasn't easy. Some nights were hard, some days were long, but he stayed sober. He read the Bible. He talked to people of faith. One day he met a man named Billy Graham, a famous Christian preacher. They walked along the beach near the Bush family home. Billy spoke about God, purpose, and personal strength. George listened. He didn't change overnight, but a seed was planted. A seed of belief. He started waking up early. He started working harder. He began thinking about service, about giving back. Slowly, he found something he never had before: discipline. In 1994, George made a surprising decision. He would run for governor of Texas. The media laughed. The politicians rolled their eyes. They said, "He's just a rich man's son. He's not serious." But George was serious now. He traveled across Texas in a truck. He shook hands with farmers, teachers, business owners. He didn't speak like a perfect politician. He spoke like a neighbor. "I'm not polished," he said, "but I care." And people listened. He worked hard. He stayed focused. He stayed humble. And in November 1994, he shocked the country. George W. Bush defeated the popular Democratic governor Ann Richards. He became the 46th governor of Texas. He had gone from party boy to public servant, from lost to chosen. As governor, he worked with Democrats and Republicans. He focused on education and public safety. He still made mistakes, but he learned. Slowly, the country began to see him differently. He wasn't just the Bush family's black sheep anymore. He was his own man. And deep inside, another idea started to grow. What if he aimed even higher? What if he ran for president? Part 4. The Presidential Race. In 1999, George W. Bush stood in front of the American people and said the words no one expected. "I am running for President of the United States." The room clapped. The cameras flashed. But behind the applause, people had doubts. Could he really lead the country? He had only been governor for a few years. He had no experience in Washington. His father had been president. But could the son do it too? The race began. His opponent was Al Gore, the sitting vice president. Gore was smart, serious, full of facts. Bush was simple, direct, and sometimes made mistakes when he spoke. People made fun of him. They said he wasn't smart enough. Late-night shows joked about his grammar. Reporters said, "He's not ready." But George stayed calm. He smiled, and he spoke from the heart. "I may not be the best speaker," he said, "but I know how to lead." His campaign used a powerful message: compassionate conservatism. He talked about faith, family, and helping communities. He connected with people who felt forgotten. He promised tax cuts. He promised respect for tradition. Slowly, people started to listen. Then came election night, November 7th, 2000. The results were tight. Too tight. It all came down to one state, Florida. At first, news stations said Bush had won. Then they said Gore had won. Then they said no one knew. For 36 days, the country waited. It was chaos. Ballots were counted, then recounted, then stopped. Lawyers argued. Reporters shouted. America was divided. Finally, on December 12th, the Supreme Court made its decision. George W. Bush would be the next president. He had won by just 537 votes in Florida. Out of millions, he had done it. The man who was once lost and mocked was now the 43rd President of the United States. But the world was calm for now, because 8 months later, everything would change, and George W. Bush would face the fire of history. Part 5. September 11th, the defining moment. It was a clear Tuesday morning. September 11th, 2001. George W. Bush was in Florida, visiting a second-grade classroom at Emma E. Booker Elementary School. The children were smiling. The teachers were proud. Cameras flashed as the president sat down to read a book with the students. The title was simple, The Pet Goat. Suddenly, a whisper. White House Chief of Staff Andrew Card leaned close to the president's ear and said, "Just 11 words." A second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack. For a moment, Bush froze. His eyes tightened. He didn't speak. He didn't move. The children kept reading. The cameras kept rolling. The world had changed, but the room didn't know it yet. He stayed seated for 7 more minutes, calm, silent, thinking. He later said, "I didn't want to panic the children. I wanted to project strength." When the reading ended, he stood up, thanked the class, and left quickly. Behind closed doors, the President of the United States was handed terrifying news. 2 planes had crashed into the Twin Towers in New York City, another into the Pentagon. A 4th had gone down in a field in Pennsylvania. Thousands were feared dead. Smoke covered the sky. America was at war, though no one yet knew with who. Bush boarded Air Force One. He flew to a secure base. Then another. Secret Service agents were nervous. Was the president safe? Could there be more attacks? But Bush didn't want to hide. "I'm going back to Washington," he said. "The American people need to see their president." Against advice, he returned to the White House that same night. He sat at the Oval Office desk. Cameras turned on. "My fellow citizens," he said slowly, "today our nation saw evil." His voice was steady. His face was firm. He spoke to a broken country not with fear, but with strength. "We will make no distinction between the terrorists and those who harbor them," he said. "We will bring them to justice." But the next moment would change how the world saw him. 3 days later, President Bush visited Ground Zero, the smoking ruins of the World Trade Center. Firefighters were digging through ash. Families held photos of missing loved ones. Dust was everywhere. Fear still hung in the air. Bush climbed a pile of rubble. He grabbed a bullhorn. A worker shouted, "We can't hear you," and the president replied loud and clear, "I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon." Cheers erupted. Tears flowed. It was raw. It was real. It was one of the most powerful moments in American history. That speech became a symbol of unity. The country stood behind him. His approval ratings soared to over 90%. Even his critics paused. In crisis, George W. Bush had shown something no one expected: leadership. In the weeks that followed, new words entered everyday life: terrorism, homeland security, Al-Qaeda. The war on terror began. Troops were sent to Afghanistan. Security changed in every airport. Americans flew flags outside their homes. The pain was fresh. The purpose was clear. But the weight on Bush's shoulders was crushing. He hardly slept. His hair turned gray. His face aged quickly. He prayed. He listened. And he made choices that would shape the world for decades. Some called him a hero. Others called him dangerous. But no one ignored him. Because on that day when everything broke, George W. Bush stood up and carried the fear of a nation on his back. Part 6. War Criticism and the Cost of Power. After the attacks of September 11th, George W. Bush had one mission: keep America safe. And at first, most of the world stood with him. The United States launched a military operation in Afghanistan. The goal was simple: find the terrorists who planned 9/11 and remove the Taliban who protected them. The war was fast, it was fierce, and it was popular. But Bush believed the danger was bigger than just Afghanistan. He feared that another country, Iraq, could be building weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, nuclear threats, deadly power in the wrong hands. In 2003, despite protests from other nations, George W. Bush gave the order. The U.S. invaded Iraq. At first, the war seemed like a success. Saddam Hussein's government collapsed quickly. The president gave a speech on an aircraft carrier with a giant banner behind him that said, "Mission accomplished." But the mission wasn't over. The months passed. Then the years. And no weapons of mass destruction were found. The war dragged on. American soldiers died. Iraqi civilians died. The country broke into chaos, and back home, trust began to fall. People started asking hard questions. Why did we go to war? Was the information wrong? Did the president rush? Critics said he had made a terrible mistake. Protests grew. The news turned dark. Even some who once supported him turned away. But Bush didn't back down. He said, "I did what I thought was right." He stayed strong. He visited wounded soldiers. He wrote letters to the families of the fallen. He carried the guilt quietly. The decisions he made were heavy, and the cost was real. History would judge him. But at the time, he had to keep going, because once you're the leader, there's no turning back. Part 7. Life After the White House. In January 2009, after 8 long years, George W. Bush stepped down as president. The crowd at the Capitol cheered for a new leader, Barack Obama. Bush smiled. He waved. Then he got on a helicopter and flew away from Washington. Just like that, his time in power was over. He returned to Texas quietly. No press conferences, no big speeches. He disappeared from the spotlight. After years of war crisis and criticism, he was tired. But he wasn't bitter. He began painting. Yes, painting. The same man who once commanded the most powerful military in the world now stood in a studio with a brush in his hand. He painted portraits of veteran soldiers he had met, men and women who had lost limbs, but not their courage. "I paint them," he said, "because I want the world to see their strength." He wrote books. He went for walks. He laughed with Laura. Slowly he became something else, not a politician, but a person. People began to see him differently. Not as the man who made perfect decisions, but as someone who had carried a burden few could understand. In interviews, he joked about his mistakes. He defended his choices, but admitted he had regrets. "I miss being famous," he once said, but not that much. He visited wounded soldiers often. He hugged them. He listened to their stories. He didn't ask for attention. He just wanted to be there. Because even after leaving the White House, George W. Bush was still trying to do what he had always searched for: something meaningful. Conclusion and reflection. George W. Bush's story is not simple. It's not clean. It's not perfect. But maybe that's what makes it powerful. He was the son of a president, but he struggled to find himself. He was called a failure, but he rose. He faced the unthinkable on September 11th, and he didn't run. He stood. He chose to lead. He made mistakes. Big ones. Decisions that hurt, decisions that saved. People still debate him. Some admire him. Some criticize him. But no one can deny this. George W. Bush walked through fire. And he kept walking. He was not the smartest man in the room. He was not the most experienced. But when the world was broken, he found his strength. Not in perfection, but in presence. That is why his story matters for you, dear learner. Because maybe you've felt lost. Maybe you've been told you're not good enough. Maybe you've made mistakes you wish you could erase. But like George W. Bush, your story is still being written. You can change. You can rise. You don't have to be perfect to make a difference. You just have to show up. You just have to keep going. This was not just a story about politics. It was a story about pain, purpose, and finding your voice when it matters most. Now I ask you, my amazing friends, have you ever made a mistake that changed your life? What did you learn from it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Practice your English. Speak your truth. And don't forget, this is Learn English with Stories. 365, your home for powerful stories and powerful learning. Subscribe now. Join us every week. One story, one lesson, one step closer to your dream. Because your next chapter starts now.